Continued with the Interspiro training, supply air.
So your BCD set up your regulator. This is your octo hose. This is your hose for your inflator. And then this other port's going to be for your dry suit hose. So whatever dry suit hose you guys put on there. And then you have an open port for other accessories if you choose to. All right. So that's the regulator. The Mark II regulator, it's very similar to the RS4 regulator that Displays is running. Numerous Division 1 departments are running it. Numerous Division 4 departments are also running it. All right. Very, very similar regulators, just the housing is different. Same internal guts, essentially. Okay.
Okay.
So back to the tank. So the tank, again, is how many cubic feet of air?
72.
72 cubic feet of air. Your filling area is right in here, so I'll show you the fill adapter. When you fill this, you guys, this will go in that way. You'll open the tanks fully, and it's going to fill through this wiring system here. It'll fill up to the regulated pressure, or the DOT approved pressure on these tanks is 4350. So the US DOT market says these tanks can get filled to 4350 PSI. In Europe, the same exact tanks are filled to 5500. Okay? There is no metal on the inside of this tank. It's plastic. It's carbon Kevlar wrapped cylinder. It's entirely a plastic inside, so you don't have to worry about corrosion or anything of that sort. So when you fill these, this fill adapter, if you look in the inside there, you'll see that it's got a small hole. Okay, and if you look at the exit hole, it's much larger. That is there for a reason. It's going to fill slow. This is a slow fill adapter. Anytime these tanks are below 500 psi, they must be filled slow. Okay. Anything over 500 psi, you can fill them fast. You can hot fill them if you choose to. They do not need to go in a fracture tank. They don't need to go into an explosive tank or anything of the sort, because these have no metal on the inside. They will literally, if they were to fail, they're going to crack, right? The pressure relief valve is down in here. Okay, the pressure relief valve is set at 12,000 psi.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so with that, one of the concerns and why we put stuff in fracture tanks, and if you look at the NIOSH report that just came out from Ohio, those guys were screwing around with a tank and trying to take a stem off, and instead of doing things correctly, they released the entire pressure relief valve, and the tank took off and spun and then hit the wall, hit the guy in the head, killed him. With these, our concern would obviously be the same thing, that these would spin, obviously, if your pressure relief valve went off. It's a slow pressure relief valve. But we're not worried about these tanks exploding, right? So if we look at our SCBA tanks, many of the manufacturers in the past, even with metal sleeves on the inside, we were able to hot fill, right? You plug in and hot fill. So you should be comfortable knowing that. Some departments are not comfortable with that. They either build a fracture tank. Some of them they fit, like Mundelein, for instance. Mundelein, their SCBA compressor, these fit, so they slide them in. I've modified ours, our old one in Elk Grove, to fit. For the last 12 years, I've been filling these outside of a fracture chamber, so it's not a concern. Below 500 psi, what happens if you fill it fast? If these rings, because the tanks technically shrink when there's no air in them, if these rings were to offset a little bit and then you fill them, you could kittywampus them, they could cut in a little bit. So that is why we fill them slow at below 500 psi. The nice thing is, if you're diving supplied air and you're plugged in the whole time, you're probably not going to use very much air out of here, and you won't need to fill them. All right. The turn on, turn off valve. You can hear it clicking, right? It's all the way on. To turn it off, just like our SCBAs, I have to push it in and turn it. And what's that going to prevent? That's going to prevent the inevitable thing that we always do as divers, is we turn our air on all the way, we check it, we look at our gauge, and then we turn our air off, right? And what do we forget to do? We forget to bleed down our gauge. So when we look at our gauge, it says 3,000 PSI. We get in the water, we descend 10 feet, and we suck the air out, and it's completely off, right? And then we drown with a tank full of air on our back. So this is to prevent that. So you have to push in, turn, push in, turn. What we don't want you to do is push in or forget to push in and just crank on this. We don't want to strip that out. So over the years, I've noticed that some guys muscle this thing and they beef it around and they've stripped it out. It's an easy fix, not a big deal. But just remember, it's different than our current scuba gear where you don't have to do that, right?
There's no quarter turn back after it's all the way
Turn
over.
it
It's
on.
all the way open.
Turn it on. You know it's on, right? I mean, you want to turn it quarter way back? Sure. But you know it's on. In your checks, pre-deployment checks, that's one of the things that we check for, right? So we check for to make sure our air is on. So that is that. The handle is a protective handle for this wire. The tanks sit like this on your back. It's extremely low profile. They're very, very lightweight, right? Extremely lightweight to the point where we have to put the counterweight on. The counterweight weighs 22 pounds. Like I showed you before, the counterweight goes on and the cotter pin always goes where?
Facing down.
Facing down. Last thing on, first thing off. Last thing on allows me as the diver to put my gear on and walk around, do whatever I need to, walk down the trail, walk down to the beach, do whatever, and then have my attendant pop that on. The 22 pounds makes this system neutrally buoyant. So that means I need to basically add enough weight to compensate for my dry suit, for my undergarments, and my body weight. I went from about 32 to 35 pounds, depending on if it was winter ice diving, to about 8. I can dive this system in the pool without any extra weight. We do it all the time. When I was in Newport News, we ran 20 plus people through, and not one person put extra weight on. And some had like 7-mil wetsuits, some had their dry suits, some had nothing. So when you guys play around with it in the pool, definitely do that. The other benefit of this is that if I'm the primary diver and I'm in trouble, and my rescue or my safety diver is coming down to find me, get me, bring me back to the surface, the first thing they should dump is this weight. It's a brass weight. You can find it later or get a new one, but now I am now a positively buoyant diver, and I'm going to come to the surface. If you've done any of the trainings or drills where we've gone down, grabbed our diver, and tried to bring them to the surface, or in the worst case scenario, if you look at the history and the reports of a diver in distress and they try to bring them to the surface, it's very, very, very difficult. So this allows you to do that at a much easier pace. Boat-based, shore-based, or pier-based, dock-based, probably more so. I'm not worried as much with shore, but we have lost them on the shore. My guys have like 2 feet off the shore, but boat-based or dock-based or pier-based, typically whoever's taking this off should have some type of a leash with a carabiner, especially if you're boat-based. That's tied on. You just clip it, and now you're good to go. And if you drop it, it's attached. Again, it's a brass weight. We can always get more weight if need be. So that's the tank system for the most part.
Is there less of a concern with dumping weight because you're on supplied air? Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. You just need to make yourself just negatively buoyant. And remember, as divers, when we're in the water, as we inhale and take a big breath, we should come to the surface a little bit, and as we exhale, we should fit about nose portion right there. We always overweight ourselves to get down quick. The problem is we overweight ourselves so much that if we had a problem, it'd be hard to get up to the surface. The caps right up here, these do come off. All right, they come off probably more for cleaning of that area. This is a protective cap. For the most part on the top side there. Keep an eye that you don't lose these. So what I found is that if there's excessive mud that is under here and it's not cleaned out 2, 3, 4 times later as you're diving, that gets all silty and we've had them slide off. All right, but if they're cleaned and checked, they should fit on fairly well. All right, it's also more of a maintenance thing, right? and when they manufacture these. The way they manufacture these tanks is they sit, there's another metal rod or metal orifice that sits on essentially a lathe, right? And then this sits on the top side, and then they spin the plastic cylinder. They spin it with your Kevlar carbon fiberglass wrap. So that if you look, sometimes you can see where, like right here, this little flat spot. So that was probably some resin that dropped, and then they just grind it down. We have tanks that are amazingly beat to hell, right? Amazingly beat to hell, and they still are in fairly good condition because of that. So that is your caps. Questions about these? What maintenance do you need to do? You need to clean, make sure the top's clean there. Just rinse it off. Maybe a little bit of Dawn dish soap or simple green. No other chemicals. Just spray them off for the most part and let them dry. This cap right here. Do we have a crescent wrench?